The champagne glass in my hand trembled, catching the light from the ballroom's tall windows, as I took in the swirl of laughter and movement behind me. Outside, Seattle's late autumn rain traced slow lines down the glass, blurring the city lights into a shimmering watercolor. I stood alone, half hoping the slick reflection would swallow me up. How did I end up back here, back in my hometown, back in the role I'd never quite managed to shake, for Daniel's wedding? It always started this way. Ever since we were kids, Daniel had been the Parker sibling everyone noticed. He had the bright smile, the clever jokes, the knack for drawing people in. I was the quiet one, content to sit at the edge of the dinner table, watching him charm our relatives and waiting for my own voice to matter. It seldom did. Today, as I watched tuxedos and silk dresses flow past me, I felt a little like a ghost haunting her own family celebration. I arrived late on purpose. Not late enough to make a scene, but just late enough that the crowd had already settled into clumps of conversation. Daniel's old college friends by the bar, our parents fussing over Olivia's dress, and distant relatives I recognized more by voice than by face. Daniel spotted me almost instantly, of course. He always had a radar for entrances. There she is, he called, raising his glass high as if I were a celebrity finally making my debut. You made it. His voice carried easily over the music, earning me a few curious glances. I forced a smile, weaving my way through the room with the self-consciousness of someone who never quite belonged at her own party. Olivia floated over on a cloud of perfume and chiffon, her hand warm but nervous in mine. So glad you're here, Emily, she said sincerely, though there was a hint of relief in her eyes that I'd actually shown up. She'd been sending gentle texts for weeks, ever since the invitations went out. I always replied, but I rarely promised anything. My parents hovered behind Olivia, beaming. You look lovely, sweetheart, my mother said, adjusting the collar of my jacket as if I were still a teenager. Dad just nodded, distracted, already looking past me toward Daniel and his ever-growing circle. They meant well, I suppose. They always did. Before long, I was swept into the mingling mass. The room smelled of rain-damp wool, expensive perfume, and hints of hors d'oeuvres. I exchanged polite hugs with aunts and uncles whose names I barely remembered. So, Emily, what are you up to these days? Someone asked, smiling as if genuinely interested, but I could see the polite confusion in her eyes. The kind of confusion that said she'd already heard more about Daniel's latest promotion than she ever would about my life. Oh, I replied with a practiced, airy tone, still working on some tech stuff. Keeping busy. I left it at that, knowing the conversation would drift quickly elsewhere, which it did. Daniel's arrival at my side was as inevitable as the next round of toasts. You know Emily, right? He said to a former classmate. She's the genius of the family, always got her nose in some wild project. One day she's going to invent something that changes the world. At least, that's what Mom keeps telling people. His grin was wide, teasing but edged, and I played along with a sheepish nod. It was easier that way. Flashbacks crept in, uninvited. I remembered birthdays when Daniel would perform magic tricks at the table, soaking up applause as I handed him cards and coins behind the scenes. I remembered spelling bees, soccer games, science fairs. He always stood in the center, arms outstretched for the camera, while I hovered just off frame. Once, I built a tiny robotic bird for the school's science week. My parents congratulated Daniel for helping me with the wires, even though he hadn't. He's such a good brother, always looking out for you, my mother would say. It stung more than I liked to admit. Tonight, Daniel was in his element. He glided from group to group, arms thrown around friends, making everyone laugh with stories I'd heard 100 times before. Olivia hung at his side, serene but slightly exhausted by the attention. Our parents were delighted, their boy had grown into exactly the kind of man they'd hoped. I tried to lose myself in the crowd, talking to cousins about Seattle's ever-growing tech scene, but it always circled back to Daniel. Michael and Grace found me by the dessert table. They had slipped away from their own group, a trio of other young entrepreneurs, and appeared at my side with practiced subtlety. "You surviving?" Michael asked, popping a miniature eclair into his mouth. His tie was slightly askew, a silent rebellion against the event's formality. "I've lost count of how many times someone's asked me what I'm doing with my life," I replied. Grace rolled her eyes in solidarity. "They have no idea, do they?" she whispered. "About what you've built, what you're about to do." "Sometimes I think it's better this way," I said, though I wasn't sure if I believed it. "It's easier to let Daniel be the star." Michael bumped my shoulder gently. "You don't have to disappear for him to shine, you know." I smiled, but the words landed somewhere between comfort and ache. I watched as Daniel raised his glass once more, tapping a fork against the crystal for attention. The crowd responded immediately, turning toward him like flowers chasing the sun. "Thank you all for being here tonight." Daniel's voice boomed. "It means the world to Olivia and me. And of course, to my amazing family. My sister Emily is here, she's always been the brains of the operation." "Seriously, this 1 inch," he pointed at me with mock solemnity. "I always told her she'd make it big. She just takes her time. You know, working on her, quirky tech projects. Maybe one day she'll let us in on her big secret." Laughter rippled around the room, good-natured on the surface, but I could feel the prickle of embarrassment rising in my cheeks. My parents laughed, too, perhaps not realizing how sharp Daniel's words felt when the whole room was watching. I took a sip of champagne, steadying my hand. "He's just joking," Olivia murmured, her eyes apologetic as she passed by. I nodded, refusing to let anyone see how much it stung. As the laughter died down, the background music resumed, and conversation picked up again. I drifted toward the window once more, cradling my glass and considering, not for the first time that night, whether I should have come at all. Maybe some absences speak louder than all the polite smiles in the world. My phone buzzed, a message lighting up on the lock screen. "Ethan Reed, looking forward to meeting the famous Emily Parker soon." I stared at the words for a moment, feeling a shiver that had nothing to do with the autumn rain. For a brief instant, I wondered if maybe, just maybe, my story wasn't meant to fade quietly into the background after all. You can't fake a family smile, no matter how perfect the photographer wants it to look. I found myself rehearsing a smile that never quite reached my eyes, standing under the soft yellow glow of the hotel ballroom's chandeliers. The morning air was thick with the scent of coffee and cinnamon pastries, filtered through bursts of laughter and the occasional clatter of a camera lens. "Let's get the whole Parker family together," called the photographer, a cheerful woman in a black turtleneck, her hands fluttering like wings as she arranged people in neat, photogenic rows. It always felt staged. No matter how many times we stood shoulder to shoulder, arm in arm, I always felt like a prop in someone else's scene. Daniel and Olivia were at the center, radiant and perfectly poised. Daniel wore a crisp navy suit that somehow made him look both grown-up and impossibly young. Olivia, in a pale blue dress, was the picture of composure. I was nudged gently to the edge of the group, awkwardly clutching a glass of mimosa I hadn't really wanted. Michael and Grace were placed with the friends section, just out of frame. The photographer beamed, arranging us as if a change in posture might conjure real harmony. "Smile, everyone. St. Parker family," she sang. I bared my teeth and counted down the seconds, my cheeks already aching. Richard, my father, fussed over Daniel's tie, straightening it for the third time since breakfast. You want to look sharp in these photos, son. These are for the grandkids one day. He didn't look at me, but his words seemed to linger between us all the same. Linda, my mother, hovered close by, brushing imaginary crumbs from Olivia's shoulder. When she glanced at me, she gave a quick, whispered command, "Smile more, sweetheart." These moments go by so fast. I tried. I really did. But the harder I forced it, the more I felt the distance between us. Each time the camera clicked, I wondered if the lens could capture the space I felt inside. After a flurry of groupings, immediate family, cousins, just the siblings, Daniel and Olivia alone, everyone relaxed into small clusters. Servers moved through with trays of pancakes and eggs, while the photographer packed away her equipment. My mimosa was mostly untouched, condensation pooling on the tablecloth. Small talk swirled like steam off the coffee urns. Daniel, always the center of attention, launched into a story about his new role at Morrison Tech. "They just put me in charge of the regional sales team," he said, voice bright with pride. "It's a big step up. The company's going through huge changes. I'm lucky to be there at the right time." Relatives leaned in, clapping him on the back, raising their orange juice in a toast. Even Olivia smiled, though I could sense the weight of expectation settling onto her shoulders. I lingered on the sidelines, idly swirling my drink. Inevitably, someone turned to me. "So, Emily, what are you working on these days?" It was Aunt Marianne, her tone genuinely curious, though I detected the same polite confusion from the night before. "Oh, a few projects. Still in tech, mostly consulting and some new development work," I replied, careful to keep it vague. The last thing I wanted was another round of awkward explanations or, worse, a lecture on real jobs. The conversation quickly pivoted to another cousin's move to Portland and Marianne's plans for a new garden. Grace, perceptive as ever, caught my eye from across the room. She arched a brow, a silent question, "You okay?" I nodded with a small, grateful smile. Michael, meanwhile, was deep in conversation about fantasy football with one of Daniel's friends. I envied his ability to blend in, to make these gatherings look effortless. Linda circled back to me as guests filtered toward the buffet. "You should get some food, honey. You hardly touched your plate." She said it kindly, but there was a tinge of concern, as if eating a pastry might fix something deeper. I nodded, collecting a plate and adding a token scoop of eggs. I found myself drawn into another conversation, this time with Olivia and two of her bridesmaids. They chatted about wedding details, flowers, the rehearsal dinner menu, the seating chart. "It's so much to keep track of," Olivia admitted, her fingers twisting a napkin. I sympathized, offering a few practical tips I'd picked up from years of event planning for work. For a moment, I felt useful. Then, Richard's voice rose above the hum. "At least Daniel is making a name for himself these days," he said with a laugh, glancing between his son and the rest of the room. The words landed softly, but their sting was sharp. There was laughter, a gentle chorus of agreement. I forced a smile, my appetite vanishing. I excused myself quietly, carrying my untouched plate out to the terrace. The morning drizzle had eased to a cool mist, and the city skyline was washed in pale gray light. I took a slow breath, feeling the ache of isolation that always seemed to follow these family rituals. Maybe I'd skip the rehearsal dinner tonight. Maybe it would be easier to stay away. A soft tap on my shoulder startled me. I turned to find Grace, her expression sympathetic. She slipped a folded note into my hand before stepping away. Inside, written in her careful print, were just a few words, "Don't let them get to you. We know what you're really building." I pressed the note in my palm, feeling the warmth of her words settle in my chest. In that moment, I remembered something my grandmother used to say: sometimes the family you build is stronger than the one you're born into. The city stretched out before me, silent and wide. I lingered there for a long while, watching the world go by, quietly gathering the strength I'd need for whatever came next. Most people think having roommates at 32 is a failure. I used to think that too, before life gave me Michael and Grace. In my case, having them wasn't just an act of necessity, it was the reason I was still standing, the foundation beneath everything I was quietly building. It was late by the time I returned to our penthouse apartment, Nexus Innovations' makeshift headquarters, perched high above the endless glimmer of Seattle's lights. The rain had picked up, tapping at the windows in quiet applause. Downstairs, the city throbbed with the life of a Saturday night, but up here, only the gentle hum of computers and the faint smell of takeout lingered. I let myself in quietly, my shoes already in hand. Michael was sprawled across the big sectional, his socked feet propped up on the coffee table, laptop balanced on his knees. Grace was perched at the kitchen island, flipping through a sheaf of printouts, her glasses slipping down her nose. She looked up and grinned. "Well, look who survived the Parker family circus," Michael announced with mock ceremony. "Did anyone try to set you up with a dentist from Long Island this time?" "Not yet," I replied, setting my bag down and shrugging off my coat. "But the weekend's not over." I tried to sound light, but the fatigue in my voice gave me away. Grace poured me a mug of herbal tea and slid it over. "We figured you could use this. And don't worry, I threatened to hack the elevator if any Parkers showed up." "Not all heroes wear capes," Michael said, eyes twinkling. "Some wear blue light glasses and order pad thai at midnight." A tired laugh escaped me, warmth curling in my chest. This was home. The three of us had been living and working together for almost 4 years now. It started as a necessity, a way to save money, pool our talents, keep each other sane through the roller coaster of launching Nexus. Along the way, the boundaries blurred. Our office was our living room, our late-night brainstorming fueled by ramen and stubborn hope. We celebrated victories with cheap Prosecco, comforted each other through setbacks with dumb sitcoms and group walks in the rain. Grace kicked off her shoes, letting them thud against the cabinets. "So, how many times did Daniel mention Morrison Tech this morning?" I rolled my eyes. "Only every 5 minutes. And don't get me started on the family photo lineup. I'm going to need therapy before the wedding is over." Michael offered a sympathetic wince, then glanced at his laptop. "Well, speaking of family, we've got some good news, real news, not dinner party gossip." He swiveled the screen toward me. On it, lines of code flickered, graphs spiked, and a digital dashboard pulsed with green check marks. "What am I looking at?" I asked, curiosity battling exhaustion. "We hit our cloud integration milestone, 3 days ahead of schedule," Michael said, barely containing his excitement. "Our servers handled twice the projected load with 0 errors." Grace grinned, eyes dancing. "That's huge. This puts us in the top bracket for the merger requirements. And best of all, no one outside this apartment knows, not Daniel, not my parents, not even my own cat sitter." A thrill ran through me. We'd worked so hard, keeping every breakthrough under wraps, afraid to jinx it or draw attention before the paperwork was final. "It almost doesn't feel real," I admitted, tracing the rim of my mug. "I keep waiting for something to go wrong, or for someone to pull the rug out from under us." Grace shot me a look. "Not this time, Emily. You made this happen." Michael nodded, leaning back and folding his arms behind his head. "You're the real CEO here. Just because Daniel talks louder doesn't mean he's got more to say." I smiled, but I couldn't quite let go of the ache. Sometimes the jokes just land a little too close, you know? I wish it didn't bother me, but it does. I can't stop hearing that voice. She's just working on her little projects. Grace softened. Family can be the hardest audience to win over. But you don't have to prove anything to them. She paused, her voice gentler. This place, what we've built, it's proof enough. Michael held up his mug. To surviving weddings and outsmarting the odds. I clinked my cup against his, feeling a genuine smile take hold. To making our own luck. My phone buzzed across the countertop, interrupting the moment. A new message from Ethan Reed, would love to chat before the big day. Let me know when you're free, some things are best said in person. Grace's eyes lit up. Ooh, the mysterious Mr. Reed again. I'm starting to think you're keeping secrets from us, Emily. I chuckled. He's just persistent. Wants to talk merger details, probably. Or maybe he's finally realized I'm not the party type. Michael nudged me. You should meet him. The CEO doesn't text people just to talk about the weather. Before I could answer, my laptop chimed with a new email notification, subject line, Morrison Tech merger, final approval pending. My pulse picked up as I clicked through the legal jargon. There it was, all our months of hard work distilled to a simple line, the deal will close upon receipt of your signature, MS. Parker. The weight of the decision pressed in. Was I trusting my instincts, or was I just running away from the family I'd never really belonged to? I stared at the screen, uncertainty pooling in my stomach. Grace raised her glass, catching my eye. To making your own family, and your own future, she said softly. We all clinked our mugs together, the city lights flickering below, the rain painting silver trails down the window. For a moment, the noise of weddings and childhood rivalries fell away, and all that remained was the quiet certainty that, whatever happened next, I wasn't standing alone. Rehearsal dinners are supposed to be about love and laughter. Ours felt more like a performance review, one where I was both the reluctant applicant and the punchline. As I stepped into the private dining room of the waterfront restaurant, candlelight flickered off polished silver and the city lights rippled across the bay. The air was rich with the smell of briny oysters and buttered salmon. Outside, fairies glided quietly through the dusk. Inside, glasses clinked and laughter rolled over the linen-draped tables. Daniel always loved an audience, and tonight, he had a good one. The guest list had been carefully curated for maximum effect, college friends who still called him the legend, old bosses from his first internship, extended family eager to swap old stories and new business cards. Olivia moved from table to table, graceful as always, but her eyes were never quite at rest. My parents were in their element, Richard booming with pride, Linda adjusting centerpieces with a careful hand. I took my seat near the end of the long table, flanked by distant cousins and two of Daniel's work friends. The room hummed with the anticipation of toasts, a ritual Daniel always dominated. It was clear from the start that he was the evening's main attraction. The first toast came from one of Daniel's fraternity brothers, a story about late-night pizza runs and improbable exam victories. Laughter rose easily. Daniel raised his glass, cheeks flushed with pleasure. Olivia spoke next, her voice warm and steady, praising Daniel's generosity and unique sense of humor. A gentle nudge in my direction, he's always been good at making us laugh, even when it's at his own expense. The room smiled, and I smiled back, grateful for her effort. But as the plates cleared and the waiters topped off wine glasses, the tone began to shift. My father, ever the storyteller, rose to recount a classic Parker family anecdote. You know, when Emily was little, she used to take apart the toaster just to see how it worked. We could hardly keep a gadget in the house for more than a week. Laughter bubbled up around me, and Daniel shot me a knowing look. She's always been the family's mad scientist, he added, leaning into the moment. Honestly, if you give her a screwdriver and an internet connection, she'll disappear for days. We used to joke that her best friend was the Wi-Fi router. I tried to play along, responding with a practiced grin. Hey, at least I never set the house on fire. Unlike some people. The table laughed, a few people clapped. For a moment, it almost felt light. But Daniel wasn't finished. He pushed back his chair and stood, glass in hand, ready for the showstopper. I want to propose a toast to family, he said, voice ringing out. Success and family, to be exact. Some of us, he gestured around the table, follow the straight path. School, job, marriage. Others, his eyes lingered on me just a bit too long, take the scenic route. Our lovable tech hermit over there, always building something. One day she'll tell us what it is. The laughter this time was louder, a little sharper. Olivia shifted in her seat, her smile fading for just a second. My cheeks burned, but I mustered my driest humor. Don't worry, Daniel. When I finally invent a robot that can write your speeches, I'll let you take the credit. A few guests chuckled, most just looked relieved that I hadn't made a scene. As the meal wound down, the conversation drifted to business, real estate, Seattle traffic, safer topics, less personal. I pushed salmon around my plate, mostly untouched, and checked my phone for the time. It buzzed with a new message from Michael, "You okay? We're proud of you. Don't let anyone dim your light." I smiled to myself, feeling the warmth of his words amid the chill of the room. Dessert arrived, small plates of lemon tart and chocolate mousse, but I barely tasted them. The laughter at the table sounded far away, as if I were behind glass. When Daniel made one last joke about Emily's top-secret startup, Olivia caught my eye. Her look was apologetic, understanding, a silent promise that she saw more than the mask I wore. As the evening wound down and guests began to slip out for the night, I lingered by the windows, watching the lights shimmer over the water. I wondered, not for the first time, how many more rounds I could take before the joke stopped stinging. It's funny how family rituals can lift you up or leave you standing alone at the edge of a crowd. Tonight, I felt like I was both, present, but not truly seen. I let the sound of laughter fade behind me as I stepped outside for a breath of cold, salt-tinged air, quietly gathering myself for whatever tomorrow's spotlight might bring. Some wounds never really heal, no matter how many bandages you pile on top. That's what I thought as the pale, misty morning filtered through the hotel suite's window, painting the room in shades of blue and silver. I sat cross-legged on the unfamiliar bed, stacks of merger documents spread around me like a fortress. The city outside was a blur, rain pooling on the streets, the Space Needle barely visible through the fog. There's always a moment at every Parker family event when I remember exactly why I left home in the first place. Today, it arrived early. The buzz of wedding preparations should have felt like a celebration, but for me, it just underscored how far I stood from everyone else. Even surrounded by people, my mother humming softly in the next room, the distant thud of Michael and Grace arguing about tie colors, I felt the old ache of being out of step. I tried to focus on the work at hand. The merger documents felt weighty in my lap, their language both empowering and intimidating. It was strange, the thought of closing a deal that could shift the city's tech landscape, all while balancing on the thin edge of family drama. Should I really sign these papers today, on Daniel's wedding day? Would that be a statement, an escape, or just an act of self-preservation? A gentle knock sounded on the door. Linda slipped in, holding a small velvet box. She wore her favorite pearl earrings and a look that hovered between pride and worry. You always did like mornings like this, she said, sitting beside me on the bed. When it's quiet, when the world slows down. I offered a small smile, surprised by the comfort in her voice. She opened the box and handed it to me. Inside was a thin silver bracelet, delicate, old-fashioned. Your grandmother gave this to me on my wedding day. She said it was for luck, but I think it was really a reminder that sometimes, luck is what you make of it. She closed my hand around the bracelet, her fingers warm. No matter what happens, I'm proud of you, Emily. Bittersweet gratitude welled up. It was the first time in years she'd said those words without a hint of comparison. For a moment, the old pain eased. After she left, Michael barged in, tie half knotted and socks mismatched. You're not seriously reading contracts on your brother's wedding day, are you? He asked, dropping onto the bed and peering at the pages. Grace trailed behind, clutching 2 coffee cups. She set one beside me and perched on the windowsill, legs swinging. We've come too far to second guess now, Grace said gently, catching my eye. You've built something incredible. You deserve to own it, no matter what your last name is. Michael leaned in, voice low. Look, if Daniel gets to parade around like the king of Seattle, the least you can do is own the empire you actually built. You're not running away from your family, you're running toward what's right for you. I tried to laugh, but the sound was small. Why does it always feel like I'm picking sides? I want to be a good sister, but I can't keep shrinking just to fit their story. Grace nudged me. You can be both, loyal and true to yourself. That's the whole point. Sometimes, real love means letting yourself grow beyond old expectations. The words lingered, quiet but powerful. I finished my coffee, heart still unsteady. A knock came at the door, softer this time. Olivia peeked in, face flushed from morning prep. Can I come in for a minute? She asked. Michael and Grace took the hint, heading to the other room with a chorus of good luck. Olivia perched on the edge of the bed, twisting her engagement ring. I just wanted to say I'm sorry for how Daniel has been acting. He gets caught up in being Daniel. I didn't know about all the old stuff between you two. I wish I'd asked more questions. I looked at her, surprised by her honesty. It's not all his fault. We were raised to believe in a certain kind of success. It's hard to break free from that. She nodded, eyes soft. Well, for what it's worth, I see you. I hope today isn't too hard. If you need a friend, I'm here. Before I could reply, my phone rang. It was Ethan Reed, his number lighting up my screen. I stepped into the bathroom for privacy and answered. Emily, it's Ethan. Just landed at Seattle Tacoma. Looking forward to meeting in person, finally. And congratulations. The board is thrilled. Let me know if you need anything. His voice was warm, steady. Thank you, I said, suddenly aware of how monumental this day really was. When I returned, Michael and Grace hovered by the door. So? Michael asked. I nodded, a decision crystallizing. It's time. With hands that shook just a little, I found the signature page, picked up my pen, and signed my name. The moment was both enormous and incredibly quiet. The rain outside seemed to pause, as if giving me space to breathe. Linda came in just as I finished, eyes searching my face. She hugged me, holding on tight. I hope you find what you're looking for, she whispered into my hair. As I slipped the silver bracelet onto my wrist, I felt the truth of it settle in. Some wounds stay with you, but maybe, just maybe, new choices can help you heal. Today, I was no longer just the outsider, I was the author of my own story, and whatever happened next, I wouldn't face it alone. All families put on a show for the world. Mine just does it with more champagne and sharper knives. I watched, from my table tucked near the back of the grand ballroom, as waiters balanced silver trays and string musicians tuned their cellos. The floral arrangements towered, lush and showy, framing champagne towers that sparkled under crystal chandeliers. There must have been over 200 guests. Daniel and Olivia's big day, celebrated in full Parker style. I found myself absently fingering the silver bracelet on my wrist, the one my mother had given me for luck that morning. It felt more like armor now than a keepsake. The room buzzed with conversation, the click of glasses and laughter mingling with the low hum of anticipation for what everyone knew would come next, the toasts. Daniel never could resist a crowd, or a punchline at my expense. As soon as dessert plates were cleared, he stepped to the microphone, beaming, his arm slung around Olivia, who smiled with the weary grace of someone who'd been holding court for hours. My parents sat close by, glowing with pride. "Thank you, everyone, for being here tonight." Daniel's voice rang out, warm and booming. "We are so grateful to have you all join us, family, friends, and colleagues." He paused, grinning. "As most of you know, I wouldn't be who I am today without the people in this room, especially my big sister Emily." His gaze found me. The crowd dutifully looked over. At every Parker family event, Emily's always found a way to stand out. He flashed that familiar, mischievous smile. Whether it was turning the toaster into a robot or hosting silent protests against my birthday parties, she's been the Parker original since day one. The crowd laughed. I managed a small, polite smile. "But hey, let's talk about ambition," Daniel continued, swirling his champagne. "I mean, look at us. I'm lucky enough to be starting a new position at Morrison Tech, big shoes, lots of pressure." There was applause. "And Emily, well, she's still looking for her big break. Still living with roommates at 32. But who's counting?" The laughter this time was sharper, a few uncomfortable glances exchanged across the table. He pressed on, buoyed by the noise. "I keep telling Emily, not everyone has to take the direct route. Some folks just like a good detour, 3 or 4 startups, lots of late-night takeout. We never know quite what she's working on, but one of these days she'll show us all, I'm sure." There was more laughter, but this time it came with a ripple of discomfort. Some guests shifted in their seats. A few avoided my eyes. I gripped my glass a little tighter. My face burned, but I held my ground. I could see Michael's jaw set tight across the room, Grace's steady look urging me not to react. My parents were smiling, perhaps believing it was all in good fun. Olivia, sensing the tone, leaned in and gently tugged Daniel's sleeve. "Honey, maybe let's move on to thanking our guests," she murmured, her voice low but firm. He waved her off, relishing the moment. "Just a little more, don't worry, Liv." He turned back to the microphone. "But hey, family's all about supporting each other, right? I mean, some of us buy houses, some of us crash on futons and code all night. Some of us climb the ladder, others, well, they invent their own ladders, eventually." A strange hush fell. The laughter this time was brittle, mingled with the clink of forks. I swallowed, blinking away the sting in my eyes. I'd learned a long time ago not to show my hurt, not here, not in front of this audience. Daniel seemed to sense the shift but barreled ahead. "In all seriousness, Emily's always followed her own path. I hope one day we get to see where it leads." He raised his glass. "To family, every definition of success." I forced myself to stand, steady and dry-eyed. I met Daniel's gaze, refusing to shrink away. "To family," I said, my voice even, and the room echoed the toast. Just then, the ballroom doors opened. The string quartet faltered, and every head turned as a tall man strode in, navy suit immaculate, confidence radiating from every step. Ethan Reed. I recognized him instantly. His photo had graced tech journals and business columns for years. But nothing in those articles captured the way he seemed to command attention without saying a word. He paused, scanning the room, then locked eyes with me. For a moment, the chatter died, as if the entire ballroom had drawn a single breath and held it. Ethan started moving through the crowd, guests parting as he approached. A murmur rippled among the tables. "Isn't that the CEO of Morrison Tech?" someone whispered, just loud enough for me to hear. Ethan made his way directly toward me, his focus unshakable, and for the first time that night, I felt the balance of the room shift. Every conversation dropped to a hush, all eyes trained on this unexpected arrival, and on me, waiting to see what, and who, I really was. You could feel the temperature drop the moment Ethan Reed stepped into the ballroom. 1 minute, the air hummed with the aftershocks of Daniel's toast, the laughter still brittle, the awkwardness clinging to the edge of every conversation. The next, it felt like a storm front had swept through, drawing every gaze toward the open doors where Seattle's skyline glittered behind a tall, impeccably dressed figure. All my life, I'd wished for someone to stand up for me. I'd just never expected it would happen in front of 200 people, and certainly not like this. Ethan cut through the crowd with quiet authority, the low murmurs trailing behind him as guests twisted in their seats to watch. Olivia's eyes widened as she recognized him, Daniel's jaw slackened in disbelief. My parents straightened, not quite sure whether to be impressed or unsettled. He didn't hesitate. He came straight to me, the invisible sister, the one everyone had politely smiled past for most of the evening. Ethan's eyes met mine, and his serious expression melted into a genuine, warm smile. Without a word, he opened his arms and hugged me, a gesture so easy and familiar that a ripple of surprise moved through the room. "There you are," Ethan said, squeezing my shoulder. "I've been trying to track you down all day." I almost missed the main event. The room fell silent. Daniel's face blanched, a flush creeping up his neck as he processed what he was seeing. "Ethan Reed," he sputtered. "Wait, what, you two know each other?" Ethan turned, still keeping a hand on my shoulder, and addressed the room in a voice that was somehow both casual and commanding. "For those of you who haven't met me, I'm Ethan Reed, CEO of Morrison Tech. But tonight, I'm mostly just here to congratulate my partner, Emily Parker." He grinned, then added with a wink, "and to crash a wedding, but I figure you only live once." You could feel the shock ripple around the tables. A few people gasped, some exchanged incredulous glances. Daniel opened his mouth, closed it again, then managed, "Partner? What do you mean?" Ethan smiled. "Not that kind of partner, Daniel. Business partner. Emily and I have been working together on the biggest tech merger this city's seen in a decade." He squeezed my arm. "Honestly, none of it would have been possible without her vision and leadership. You're all lucky to have her in your family." Someone at the next table dropped their fork. Michael and Grace were beaming at me from across the room, pride and delight plain on their faces. Olivia looked at Daniel, confusion and a hint of concern flitting across her features. As whispers raced through the crowd, Ethan continued, "You know, I almost didn't make it tonight. We just finalized the paperwork this morning. Nexus Innovations and Morrison Tech, now one company, with Emily as the new chairwoman of the parent board." He paused for effect. "If you're wondering about those roommates you've heard so much about, Michael and Grace aren't just Emily's friends, they're her co-founders. And if you're wondering about those late nights and all the quirky projects, well, you're about to see a whole lot more of them in the news." the room broke into an excited buzz. I saw guests fumbling for their phones, already typing my name into Google. I caught the astonished face of my father, the realization dawning slowly, and my mother blinking back tears, though whether from pride, regret, or just overwhelm, I couldn't tell. Ethan turned back to Daniel, his tone gentle but unmistakably firm. "Congratulations on your wedding, Daniel. I hear you're starting at Morrison Tech next week. Should be an interesting time to join us." Daniel's mouth moved, but for once, no words came out. His eyes darted from Ethan to me and back again, his confident veneer peeling away. "You're my boss," he managed, the words almost a whisper. Ethan just smiled. "You could say that. Emily will be overseeing the parent company. I'll be CEO of the division. Big changes ahead, my friend." The entire room watched as Daniel sat down hard, color draining from his face. It was as if the entire story he'd built, about who mattered, who belonged, who was worth listening to, had just unraveled in the space of 5 minutes. All around, guests began to whisper. "Is that really her? Nexus Innovations, didn't they just land the city's biggest contract?" I had no idea. Some were already scrolling through their phones, eyes widening as the headlines and board bios loaded on their screens. I stood a little taller, feeling the warmth of Ethan's support and the astonishment, maybe even a little admiration, from people who had never really seen me until now. For the first time all evening, the room was focused on me, and not for the reasons Daniel had expected. I caught Michael's eye, and he lifted his glass in a silent toast. Grace grinned, mouthing "finally," from across the table. Even Olivia smiled, a quiet acknowledgement that the balance had shifted. As the hum of discovery grew louder, Ethan leaned in and said softly, "You ready for what's next, partner?" I nodded, heart pounding. For the first time in a long while, I was. And as the ballroom buzzed with questions, with guests Googling my name and my company, I realized, this was just the beginning. There are few things more satisfying than watching a bully try to rewrite history, especially when everyone's watching. The ballroom's hush was sharper now, the music a distant memory, 100 side conversations humming at the edges. Phones glowed with fresh headlines. All eyes flicked between me, Ethan, and Daniel, as if the truth was still up for debate. For years, Daniel's version of the truth had gone unchallenged. He'd narrated my story for our relatives, painting me as the odd one, the disappointment, the mysterious tech hermit who never quite made good. I let him, mostly, because it was easier to shrink than to fight. But tonight, in this room filled with people who'd quietly laughed at his jokes, I found I'd had enough. Daniel tried to recover, straightening in his chair as a forced smile spread across his face. "Hey, come on," he said, voice brittle, "this is just Parker family teasing. Emily knows I was joking, right, Em?" He looked to me for rescue, but I held his gaze, steady and unflinching. "I'm not sure you remember what a joke is anymore, Daniel," I said, my voice low but clear. "Because most of what you call teasing stopped being funny a long time ago." A ripple moved through the crowd, embarrassment, maybe, or the thrill of long-awaited honesty. I took a deep breath, feeling Ethan's quiet presence behind me and Michael and Grace close at my sides. "You know," I continued, "I used to think maybe I deserved the way I was treated. Like it was my fault for being different, or for not following the same path. But what really stings is that you didn't just keep it between us, you made sure everyone believed your version. Mom, Dad, do you remember last year, when I called to tell you Nexus had made its first million? You hung up to take Daniel's call about his new lease. Or the year before, when I got my first patent approved, you said you were too busy with wedding planning to talk." Linda's lips parted, her hand drifting to her chest. Richard looked down, shame warring with confusion. Emily, we just thought that Daniel needed more support? I finished gently, but firmly. I know. You've always said he needed more from you, because he's not as self-sufficient. But it wasn't support, it was belief. I just wanted someone to believe me. Daniel tried again, his bravado faltering. Look, maybe I overdid it. But I didn't mean to hurt you. Olivia was silent beside him, eyes wide as she truly saw her husband in a new light. Around the room, people were listening differently now. They were hearing the things they'd laughed at before, realizing how heavy those jokes must have been. Michael stepped up, placing a steadying hand on my shoulder. You've been more than patient, Em. You don't have to explain yourself anymore. Grace nodded, her tone kind but unwavering. Sometimes the people who love you the most are the slowest to see you clearly. But that doesn't mean you stop being who you are. I turned to face my family. I spent years chasing approval from people who only ever saw what they wanted to see. I'm done with that now. I don't need anyone's permission to be proud of what I've built, or who I've become. The silence that followed was different, deeper, more thoughtful. For a long moment, no one moved. Richard finally stood, his voice trembling. Emily, I'm sorry. We should have listened more. Can we talk? Can we? But I shook my head. Not right now, Dad. I need some space to figure out what comes next. For once, I'm going to put myself first. I turned away, Ethan and my team falling in step beside me as we moved toward the exit. Behind me, I heard Linda's soft sob and Daniel's broken whisper, but I didn't look back. The heavy doors closed behind us, shutting out the din of shocked whispers and the soft ring of glassware. My phone buzzed, and I glanced down at a new message from a guest I barely knew. I never knew you were so accomplished. Sorry for how we treated you. Congratulations, Emily. I paused in the quiet hallway, breathing in the cool, rain-scented air that drifted from the city outside. For the first time in years, I felt the sharp edges of old wounds dulling, replaced by something almost like peace. The truth was out, and whatever came next, I would face it on my own terms. The wedding wasn't over, but for me, the celebration had already begun. As soon as the ballroom doors closed behind us, I felt the weight of the evening shift, no longer dragging me down, but lifting me, buoyed by a strange sense of relief. The quiet in the hallway was a balm after so many years of noise. Michael and Grace flanked me, Ethan a reassuring presence at my side, and beyond the tall glass windows, the rain transformed the city lights into shivering streaks of gold and blue. My phone vibrated, once, then again, and again, until the lock screen was a patchwork of missed calls and texts. Family, relatives, even a few old friends from college. The notifications blurred into a wall of apologies, questions, shocked exclamations. Emily, we're so sorry. Please call us. I had no idea. Can we talk? Proud of you, even if we never said it. Some messages were frantic, others sheepish, and a few, mostly from distant aunts and cousins, were simply nosy. I scrolled through them, not sure whether to laugh or cry. Years of silence, and now, suddenly, everyone had something to say. Ethan glanced over my shoulder. You don't have to answer them tonight, he said quietly. There's a whole world outside that ballroom, you know. And tonight, I'd say it belongs to you. Michael stepped closer, draping an arm around my shoulder. We're kidnapping you for a proper celebration. Headquarters is only 10 minutes away. Grace ordered pizza, and there's a bottle of real champagne with your name on it. Grace grinned, slipping her arm through mine. Besides, you promised us first dibs on the after party. I laughed, a real, unguarded sound that surprised even me. You know what? I think that's the best offer I've had all night. As we made our way through the hotel lobby, voices and music from the ballroom faded behind us. The late-night staff shot us curious glances, perhaps wondering why the wedding party was peeling off, why the woman in the navy dress looked suddenly so free. Just outside the revolving doors, the rain had eased to a fine mist. Seattle's air was fresh, laced with the scent of wet pavement and distant coffee. Michael jogged ahead to hail a car, while Ethan conferred with Grace about logistics for the morning's press release. I was pulling up my coat collar against the chill when I heard footsteps behind me. Olivia hurried over, her heels clacking on the slick tile. Her eyes were red-rimmed but clear, determination etched across her face. "Emily," she said softly. "I just wanted to say, I'm so sorry for everything. I didn't realize how deep it all ran, with Daniel, with your family. I should have asked more questions." She glanced back through the glass, as if she could see Daniel inside, trapped by the chaos he'd created. I hesitated. "It's not all on you, Olivia. I spent years letting them tell my story. Tonight was the first time I really took it back." She nodded, voice trembling. "I don't know what happens next for us, for me and Daniel. But I hope you know, I admire you. For standing up, for being honest. Maybe I should try that too." We hugged briefly, a quiet pact in the shadow of so much noise. As she turned to leave, Daniel appeared at the edge of the lobby, his tie undone, face strained. He looked at me, not angry, not defensive, just lost. "Emily," he started, but the words failed. I saw Richard trailing behind him, shoulders slumped, and Linda clutching her purse, eyes brimming with tears. I shook my head gently. "Not tonight," I said, my voice soft but certain. Ethan opened the car door, waiting. "Ready?" I nodded, sliding into the back seat between Michael and Grace. The doors shut with a satisfying finality, cocooning us from the turmoil outside. The car eased out of the parking lot, wipers sweeping the mist from the windshield. Through the rear window, I watched Daniel and Richard arguing in the lot, their voices muffled by glass and rain. Linda sank onto a bench, shoulders shaking, her grief a silent echo of years gone by. Michael squeezed my hand. "You did the right thing, Em. Sometimes choosing yourself is the bravest thing you can do." Grace nodded, resting her head on my shoulder. "You don't have to carry it all anymore. We're here. This is your family, too." I let their warmth sink in, my chest tight with relief and a strange, trembling joy. For the first time, I was leaving a family event with people who saw me for who I was, not who they wished I'd be. As we turned onto the freeway, my phone chimed again. This time, it wasn't a relative, but a flurry of news alerts and messages from colleagues. Seattle Tech Insider, Nexus Innovations CEO steals spotlight at Morrison wedding. Emily Parker, the quiet genius behind Seattle's biggest merger. Congratulations. Proud to know you. When can we talk? The city rolled past in watery streaks, but for once, the future didn't look so lonely. I smiled, leaning into the hum of conversation, the promise of new beginnings, and the certainty that, finally, my story was my own. The office lights burned late into the night, but for once, I wasn't working alone. Instead of the hush of a deadline or the low hum of code compiling in the background, the penthouse buzzed with laughter and the clinking of glasses. Outside, Seattle sparkled, the rain finally lifting, leaving everything washed and bright. The city lights looked less like distant stars and more like possibilities. Takeout cartons littered the long table, Thai noodles, pizza, a tray of chocolate chip cookies that Michael had baked, badly, and insisted on serving anyway. Someone had popped the champagne Michael and Grace had been saving for, something worth celebrating. The cork had nearly taken out a pendant lamp, but no one cared. It was the kind of mess that meant something had gone right. We were all there, huddled in the living room, my team, my real family. Michael sat cross-legged on the floor, chopsticks in one hand and his phone in the other, scrolling through news alerts. Grace had commandeered the biggest chair, feet tucked under her, balancing a plate on her knees. Ethan leaned against the counter, tie loose, watching us with that easy, proud smile of someone who knew just how far we'd come. To Emily. Michael cheered, raising his glass. To our fearless leader, who finally gets the credit she deserves. And who, he added, turning to me with a mischievous glint, never once let us give up, not even when we really, really wanted to. The team erupted in laughter. Someone started a round of here, and even Ethan joined in, his deep voice echoing over the hum. Grace dabbed her eyes, half laughing, half crying. You know, there were days I thought we'd never get here. Remember that first winter? The power went out and we coded by candlelight, living off microwave popcorn for a week. Michael groaned. I still can't eat popcorn. But hey, we shipped the beta. And then the night we almost lost our seed funding, Grace added, looking at me with gentle pride. You told us, we didn't come this far just to come this far. I think about that a lot. I let myself sink into their words, letting the pride settle somewhere deep and unfamiliar. For years, I'd worried that celebrating myself would feel like arrogance. But in this room, surrounded by people who'd seen every late night, every failure, every little win, I just felt seen. Ethan caught my eye and lifted his glass. You've built something real, Emily. Not just a company, but a community. I hope you know how rare that is. And if you ever need anything, advice, a sounding board, or just a friend, I'm here. He said it simply, with respect that made my throat tighten. We toasted again. Someone started playing a playlist of throwback songs, and suddenly we were all singing along, even if only half of us knew the words. There were hugs and quiet confessions, a few well-earned tears, and 100 stories about the road that brought us here. In a quiet moment, Michael disappeared into his room and returned with a wrapped package. Open it, he said, pressing it into my hands. Inside was a photo, freshly framed, a candid shot of the three of us in the early days, hair a mess, faces tired but lit with hope, huddled over a tangle of cables in the old apartment. Across the bottom, Grace had scrawled in gold ink, Our real family, EST 2020. I couldn't speak. I just pulled them both into a hug, feeling the laughter and the love and the relief swirl together. For the first time in my life, I allowed myself to feel truly, deeply proud. Not just of the merger, or the headlines pinging on my phone, Nexus Innovation CEO steals spotlight at rival's wedding, but of everything we'd built, every moment that had led us here. Later, when the laughter had quieted and most of the team had drifted home, I stood by the window, gazing out at the city. The lights glittered with promise, and the reflection in the glass showed not just one woman, but all the faces who'd stood by her side. For the first time, I felt unafraid of what came next. The story was no longer about being left out, or living in someone else's shadow. It's funny how people only reach out once they realize what they've lost. For years, I would have given anything for a phone call from my parents, just to hear their voices, to know they'd been thinking of me. Now, with the world turned upside down, my phone buzzed with messages I wasn't sure I wanted to read. It started the day after the wedding. I woke up to sunlight streaming across my bed, the city stretching awake beneath me, and a string of missed calls blinking on my phone, Richard Parker. Linda Parker. Each with a voicemail that began with uncertainty and ended with longing. There were emails, too, subject lines like "Let's talk," "Please call us," and "We're so proud of you, Emily." I sat at my kitchen table, turning my mug in my hands, letting the notifications pile up. Daniel texted too, his message both awkward and raw. "I'm sorry, Em. I was jealous, I guess. You were always braver than me. I hope someday you'll forgive me. If you want to talk, I'm here." Olivia reached out that afternoon, her message gentle, honest. "Thank you for telling the truth. I'm still figuring things out with Daniel, but I want you to know I'm grateful. If you ever want to get coffee, I'd love to hear more about what you're building." I read their words and set my phone aside, staring at the city, feeling both exposed and strangely free. I didn't reply, not right away. For the first time, I allowed myself to sit with the swirl of anger, relief, grief, and pride. Michael noticed my silence over takeout that night. He nudged a container of noodles my way. "You don't have to answer right now," he said. "You don't owe anyone anything, Em, not after all this." Grace nodded, leaning across the table, her gaze steady. "If you want to see them, do it for you, not for them. Set your terms. Protect your peace. We'll back you, no matter what." The next morning, I opened a new email from Linda. "We're sorry, Emily. We want to understand. Please, can we meet?" The words were simple, but the ache behind them was real. I spent the day walking the city, sorting through memories. I thought about little Emily, wanting nothing more than her father's praise, her mother's arms, her brother's laughter. I thought about every call ignored, every accomplishment dismissed, every time I'd swallowed my voice to keep the peace. And I thought about what it had taken to finally stand up and say, "Enough." When I got back to the penthouse, Michael and Grace were there, their support unspoken but absolute. I breathed deep, feeling the weight of both loss and possibility. That night, I replied to my parents, "I'll meet you at my office, Thursday at noon. Just us. I want to talk, but on my terms." Thursday came bright and cold. I wore my favorite navy dress, the one I'd chosen for myself, not to please anyone else. The Nexus offices were quiet, sun flooding the glass-walled conference room where I waited. Photos lined the shelves, our first product launch, the team crammed around a whiteboard, Michael and Grace in ridiculous party hats. And, on my desk, a faded childhood snapshot, Daniel and me, arms slung around each other, grinning, before the world got so complicated. At noon sharp, the elevator chimed. Richard and Linda stepped out, their faces drawn and uncertain. My father carried a bouquet of tulips, my mother's hand trembling at his elbow. We greeted each other carefully, cautious smiles, hugs that didn't linger too long. We settled into the conference room, the city a glittering backdrop behind us. For the first time, I felt ready. Stronger than ever, I met their eyes, knowing I was seen, not as a footnote or a family disappointment, but as myself. As we began to talk, I glanced once more at that childhood photo, feeling a tangle of sadness and hope. Maybe you can never go back to what you were. Maybe you don't need to. Sometimes, you build something better, one honest conversation at a time. Not all family stories have neat, happy endings. Sometimes, that's exactly what you need to move forward. I'd always pictured closure as a single, shining moment, words spoken, wounds healed, a family gathered around the table as if nothing had ever gone wrong. Now I knew better. Real life didn't care for clean lines and tidy bows. Sometimes, acceptance was the most honest kind of peace you could hope for. Spring had come to Seattle in bright, tentative bursts, cherry blossoms dusting the sidewalks, sunlight streaming through the windows of my office, washing everything in gold. A fresh vase of tulips, my father's favorite, stood on my desk. They were a gentle nod to the visit I knew was coming, a way to remind myself that I could be both strong and soft, open and guarded. Richard and Linda arrived right on time, both looking older than I remembered, less sure of themselves, more vulnerable. We sat in the sunlit conference room, a table between us, the city sprawling in every direction outside. They didn't rush, and for once, neither did I. My father cleared his throat, his voice low. "Emily, I'm sorry. We failed you. We let our pride, our fears, get in the way of seeing who you really are. That's on us, not you." Linda's eyes glistened. "You've always been strong, Em. We just weren't strong enough to meet you where you were. We want to try now, if you'll let us." I listened, letting their words settle. They sounded real, bruised and honest, no longer hiding behind easy explanations or old defenses. I found myself surprised by the tenderness I still felt for them, and the boundaries I now knew I needed to draw. "I appreciate that," I said gently. "But things can't go back to the way they were. I won't shrink myself again just to fit someone else's story. If you want a relationship, it has to be built on truth, mine, yours, all of it. No more minimizing, no more erasing what I've done or who I am." They nodded, relief mingled with regret. For a moment, none of us spoke. The only sound was the city, a bus rumbling below, a gull calling somewhere in the open air. Bittersweet acceptance settled over the room. Things would never be what they once were, but something new, fragile, honest, maybe even hopeful, could grow in its place. I saw it in the way my parents reached for my hand, in the way I didn't pull away. As we wrapped up, I invited Michael and Grace to join us for lunch, my chosen family stepping easily into the circle. There was laughter, a little awkward at first, but real. Grace handed my mother a cookie from a plate she'd baked that morning. Michael coaxed a reluctant smile from my father with a story about our first product launch. The conversation was careful, but it was a start. Afterward, when my parents left, I felt the strange lightness of relief and release. I watched them walk away through the glass doors, not certain of the future, but no longer tied to the past. Back at my desk, Ethan stopped by, contract in hand, a symbol of everything I'd worked for, everything that lay ahead. "You ready?" he asked with a small smile. I signed my name, the stroke of the pen feeling less like an ending than a beginning. "More than ready," I said, closing the folder and letting the sun warm my hands. As the office emptied, Michael and Grace lingered. We shared a quiet meal, reminiscing about the messy, miraculous journey that had brought us here. Laughter came easier, hope more naturally. There were no more sharp edges, no more competing stories, just the truth we all lived by now. Later, alone in my office, I gazed out at the city. I was at peace, with or without my parents' full approval, with or without anyone's permission. I smiled, closed my laptop, and stood to face the next chapter, my own, at last. Because forgiveness isn't about letting someone off the hook. It's about letting yourself heal, so you can step forward into the light and live the story that's always been yours to write. Looking back, I realize that true peace doesn't always come from a perfect reconciliation. It comes from finally honoring your own worth, even when others don't see it. Family may stumble, and sometimes we must choose new beginnings over old wounds, but kindness and honesty open the door to healing on both sides. In life, if we have the courage to listen, forgive, and value ourselves, love can always find a way home. If this story touched your heart or brought up a memory, I'd be glad to hear your thoughts. Sometimes, sharing our journeys is how we help each other move forward.